Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm so grateful you could join me today. I'm super excited about today's video. It's a little bit different. We're going to have some fun with this brand new stamp set from Gina K Designs called You Make Me Happy. It's kind of a wee little one. It's got this little jar and some really great florals, and y'all know I love me some florals. And I want to try something a little bit different today. Building a scene and kind of creating this kind of watercolor look. So I want to experiment a little bit here with some of the new Amalgam inks. I've got Barely There and Skeleton Leaves here, and I think I'm going to be using Barely There. But I'm not sure, so I just kind of pulled both of them to see which ones I wanted to use. But like I said, I'm going to use these Amalgam inks to build a scene with this stamp set on my watercolor paper. And then I'm going to use that scene to just kind of frame in some Washy Washy Watercolor. And then we're going to stamp over it. So it's going to be a little bit of a different kind of video today. It's going to focus a lot on watercolor, and I'm going to talk a lot about watercolor properties. So I hope you love it. But okay, so let's just get into it. Here's the watercolor paper I'm using. This is from B Paper Company. I love this watercolor paper for paper crafting. It's fantastic. It's a nice bright white. It's 100% cotton. It's a nice thirsty paper, so it takes watercolor really well. So I'm excited about that. So I've got a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 watercolor paper taped down to this brown board I have, and I'm taping it down because this is going to be a really washy kind of watercolor project, and I don't want the paper to warp while I'm working on it. So I've got it taped down to this little board, and I'm using Mission Gold watercolor here that I have in this palette. So here is the color palette that I have, and I'm going to be focusing a lot on the pinks and the blues to mix up some violets, and I'll talk a little bit about watercolor mixing along the way as we move into the project. And this is a great watercolor brand for paper crafting, and I do use it a lot in my professional projects, so I'll link it up if you're interested to take a look at that watercolor. And I'm using this brand new purple tape from ThermoWeb. They've come out with this smaller size, and I'm super excited about it because it's just a perfect size for what I want to do today. I've got my silver black velvet brushes in a 6 and an 8, and these are my favorite brushes on the planet. So, okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've sped this up a little bit. I am going to be concentrating all of the stamping in that kind of center portion, and I am using the Barely There Amalgam ink. I've got the little jar, and as you can see, that Barely There is barely there. So super, super perfect ink for helping you to build a scene, to do some coloring. But I'm going to be using it a little bit different today. And you can see I'm framing in all of the pieces. So I'm using the blooms, and I'm just creating this kind of 3 blooms that are coming out of the jar. And I'm just using the inks and the stamp to build the scene on the watercolor paper so that I can start to apply some washy washy watercolor and get this kind of impressionistic look with my stamping. And so the stamping, and I'm just kind of fidgeting it around here a little bit and just putting the elements in here to create this scene, but I'm not going to be watercoloring inside the lines. Hello! You know me, I'm not going to be doing it inside the lines. But look at the watercolor paper here. So I'm using the Barely There. I can see the scene is on my watercolor paper. So it's giving me the frame of reference that I need to begin to paint in some of the watercolor. So while I'm painting this in, I'm going to walk you through some of the watercolor techniques that I'm using, and I am using the watercolor today to create a washy washy look. So my paper is completely dry. I have not pre-wet the paper. if I would have pre-wet the paper, the watercolor that I'm applying would be kind of running all over the paper. So I wanted to get a little bit more control. And right now I'm mixing up some cerulean blue and some ultramarine blue and just kind of playing. So I really started with the cerulean blue first to just kind of get a very pale light wash of color in on that jar, and then I'm dropping in some ultramarine blue to just kind of bring up some of the shadows. Now I'm going to be playing with this all along, and it looks like I'm kind of doing it a little bit with a little bit of precision here, so it seems like I'm going to be like coloring inside the lines, but fear not, there will be some washy-washy watercoloring happening here. So I'm just kind of framing in the jar first before I move on some of the other elements. And I've gotten the brush a little bit wet and with no color, and I'm using the color that's on the right side of that jar and using that to just kind of ground the jar and create a little shadow underneath it. So now I'm going to move on to some of the leaf elements, and instead of precisely painting in the leaves, I'm going to use my brush and use the whole brush and use it and stroke it in. So you can see that I'm just kind of using the whole brush and creating brush strokes with the color to kind of cover up that stamp that I did with the leaf. So I'm turning my piece a little bit. I am a left-hander, and I need to turn the piece around quite a bit in this video so that you can actually see what I'm painting. So you saw that I bent the tip of the brush there for that stamp to create that brush stroke leaf. And I love that. I love sharing how to use your brush and using the brush strokes to either color in your stamped images or actually paint images, leaf images, and all kinds of things. So I'm moving on to the leaf elements that from the stamp down here by the left part of the jar. And you can see that I'm bending the tip of the brush and creating that leaf element. Now you could use a smaller brush and you could really delicately paint it in, but this is a really quick and easy way to get color into the stamped image. And again, I'm using the stamped images as my reference to be able to paint in color. And I am painting in a really lighter hue of the colors that I'm working with. So here's the little rosebud that's part of that stamp set. So I've kind of just put in the little tiny strokes underneath the rosebud, and I'm using the tip of the brush and kind of flicking it up to create that shape around it. And then I'm also going to go back in and create the bud and use the tip of my brush in more of an illustrative way and just kind of draw that in. But right now I'm going to move on to the flower elements of the stamp set. So here's the thing about the 3 flowers that are in the stamp set. They are gorgeous, but the stamps are kind of small. So I could go in and paint every petal, but I'm not going to do that because this is going to be a washy-washy kind of watercolor project. So I'm working with a little bit of these colors here. I've got alizarin crimson, I've got a violet color, and I'm going to just go ahead and put some of these colors down on my porcelain plate. I'm probably going to mix them up a little bit. This is quinacridone rose, which is a really beautiful rose color. I'm adding a little bit of yellow over here. Yellow is a fantastic color for you to add on top of things once things are dry because it really kind of gives it that glow and really pops everything. And I've got a little bit of a bright violet here that I'm adding in. So I'm going around the shape of the flower just so we can get the shape of each thing. Now it's hard to see because of the barely there, so I'm shaping in the color here, and there's the flower, so you can see how tiny it is, and it has lots of petals. And if you were really to go in and paint, you could paint each one of those petals in detail, but we're not going to do that today. I'm doing more of a washy-washy kind of look and feel. So I've painted around the edge of the flower and I'm drawing that color in towards the center. And while I'm doing this, this is helping me to frame in the position of where the flower is. And you need very little paint on your brush, and you can see I'm just going back and dipping in and getting a little bit of color, and I'm using water. My apologies there for a little bit of the blur that was happening. Yeah, it was just being a little technology problem, but sorry about that. So okay, so moving on to the quinacridone rose, and I'm moving on to the other flower. And again, I'm just kind of using some loose brush strokes just to kind of get the shape of the flower. And I am not layering in the paint super thick. As you can see here, I've just went back, cleaned off my brush, and I'm just using the paint that's in the shape and drawing it into the center. And I really just want to do this so that I can see where my flowers are and see where all of my elements are from my stamped scene. So just going to add a little bit more color. I'm kind of mixing these two together, the quinacridone rose and that bright violet together. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of Scarlet Lake, which Scarlet Lake is a color that's a red tone color but has a little bit of oranges in it. So you can see I'm grabbing that and kind of putting it in between. So I've got three kind of separate little colors here. And I'm following that shape that I've stamped and really loosely dancing the brush. I call this brush dancing. Just brush dancing around that shape so I can get it formed, and then just bringing the color into the center so that I can see those three blooms. Now, like I said, you could go into each one of those layers in the blooms. You could use any kind of medium, colored pencil, etc. I'm just using watercolor right now and I'm shaping it in. And I'm taking a little bit of my olive green here and using the shape of the stems and just kind of pulling those stems down into the vase. A little bit of that green is mixing with the blue and it's just looking super cute. So I'm taking that center floor and I'm just adding a little bit more because I have really the layer of watercolor I've got going here is very light, so it's not really intense here. I've got a nice light wash of color. So I'm just using my tip of my brush here and doing a little bit of brush dancing and following the shape of that little rosebud that's in the stamp set and just kind of framing that in. And I'm going to drop a little bit more of this ultramarine blue over on the right hand side of the jar just to kind of create a little bit more shadows. So you can see I've got my brush, I cleaned out my brush, got it super, super clean, and I'm just pulling that color from right to left just to get a little bit of a difference between lights and darks here. But I'm not going to do that across the whole entire painting because I'm not going for precision here. What I'm doing here is blocking in color, because we're going to be doing some over stamping and layering, but I want to see what's underneath it. So I've used the barely there. I've stamped everything in to create this scene, and now I'm blocking in my watercolor. So I'm mixing up a little bit more greens, and I'm going to add a little bit more depth to some of the leaf elements. So I'm just kind of playing with some greens here. And when you're mixing up colors for watercolor, just kind of there are lots of ways to mix up color, and there are lots of different references. I've even shared lots of different formulas for mixing up color, but one of my favorite things to do for mixing up color is just to do it what I call intuitively and play with the paints that you have, and just put some on the palette and say, okay, I've got this green. What if I add a little bit of yellow? What if I added a little bit of blue? What if I added a little bit of Payne's gray? And what if I added different colors? What kind of hues could I create with my watercolor? So I really encourage you to do that with any kind of watercolor set that you have. Get to know it. Play around with it. Grab a plate or a dish from your kitchen and put some color down and just kind of play with the different colors and see what you can create with what you have. So you can see here that I've gone in and I'm just adding a little bit more color here, just deepening what I've got going on here so I can really see what I'm doing. So I'm going to let this dry a little bit, and then we're going to move on to the next step, which might feel a little bit uncomfortable to you, but let's do it. So I have cleaned off my brush, and it's free of pigment from the watercolor. And right now what I'm doing is I'm going around the edges of everything that I have painted, and I'm adding in a little bit of color since I'm taking away so much. And I'm bleeding them together. I'm washing all of the things that I've done around the edges, and I'm just adding more water and letting that color flow out so that we can begin to create some kind of backgrounds and really get the stamped images less with less hard lines. So I'm adding a little bit of blue to the bottom here where it's kind of washed out, and I'm just getting my brush nice and wet, and you can see that it's super wet, and dabbing in a little bit of color in my blooms where I'm taking some away and really letting that color just kind of flow. So I'm softening the edges of the blooms and everything that I painted and adding in a little bit more and then softening it out by just adding water on the end of my brush and just working the edges of what I've created here. Now, one of the things I want to share about watercolor is that it looks super vibrant. Even artist grade watercolors like Mission Gold that I'm using here in today's tutorial looks super bright when it's wet. And then when it dries, it starts to fade back a little bit. So you can add more to it. But right now I'm just adding in some splatters and just kind of get that really washy, impressionistic kind of fun look. So you can see that those blooms are really kind of fading out around the edges, and that's the effect that I was really kind of going for. So I'm using my heat tool and I'm really drying this out so that you can kind of get that effect. So along the way I've added many layers along the way. And you would think that they would be like super intense in color. And when I was painting and it was super wet, you noticed how intense the color was. But as it starts to dry, that color starts to fade back a little bit and gives you opportunity to work with it further by adding more color. And that's called glazing, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to be over stamping. So you can see how the colors are still really vibrant. The stamping is still back there, but the coloring is not precise. It's very washy. We've got a little bit of modeling going on, and it's just got a lot of texture. So now what I'm using is Gina K Designs Slate ink. I didn't want to go full on black. I really wanted to use this this gray color that I love from the Gina K line. And I'm going in with the blooms, but I'm offsetting them a little bit when I stamp them so that we've got that washy watercolor underneath them, but we've got this super graphic stamped approach going over top of it. So you get that kind of look and feel of watercolor without a lot of precision here, but with that feeling of with that really big graphic look with that slate going over top of all these super bright colors. But I am offsetting the stamp a little bit so that you can see the watercolor underneath. And you can see it here with the leaves, how I've just kind of turned the leaves a little bit and rotated them, and we get that kind of offset look and feel. Really love this technique. It helps you play with your watercolor a little bit and get to experiment with your paint without worrying so much about the precision of painting inside the lines. When you create the scene first and then you stamp over top, super fun. And I did line up that jar, and just kind of offset it just a little bit. And I really, really am loving the way this looks. Now to further take it another step further with the graphic stamping, I'm taking that 3-leaf image and I'm going to create this triad of leaves around this scene just to kind of complete the composition of this design. So I've got this leaf image that I'm going to stamp right in here and just kind of have it go off to the left a little bit. And I'm really just creating that triad look of leaves to create some visual energy here and just really fun composition. So, okay, so I've got this, I'm just digging this look. I'm just loving it. Okay, so I want to add a little bit more of blue. So I've got a little bit of ultramarine blue here that I'm adding to the bottom just because that blue really does fade back when it gets dry. So I really want to ground this whole image a little bit. So it looks a little super bright right now, a little bit scary, but I'm going to dab a little bit of it off. And remember, you can always, with watercolor, add more water to water it down. You can use your paper towel, you can use your microfiber cloth, and you can take some of that away. And now I'm just taking a clean brush and I'm going in to the leaf images that I have here, and I'm moving that slate ink around a little bit and just kind of softening it. It is graphically, it's kind of beautiful and crisp, but I want to soften it a little bit. I'm going to do that as well with the other stamped leaves at the top. I'm just kind of softening and using the slate ink as a watercolor. I'm just wetting it and moving it around a little bit and just softening it up so that it's not too graphically overpowering, but it really will blend well with the watercolor work that's already been done here. And I am just digging this card. And I'll be honest, in the beginning, you just never know when you start a washy-washy watercolor project like this, if it's going to kind of produce the results that you want. And that's why it's kind of just important to play with your watercolor, play with your stamps, and just kind of have some fun with it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit this with the heat tool and just kind of dry it up a little bit. And then here's the fun part. When you pull the tape, it's like a super magical reveal. Even though I'm not going to keep those lines, I'm going to run this piece of watercolor paper through the die cutter and just kind of create a different rectangular shape with it to complete the card. But I'm really loving this color. I'm really loving this graphic look and feel. And you just kind of get a look at it. Here, after I have cut it, I ran it through my die cutter with a rectangular die just to kind of give it that little stitched edge there. But now I just want to play a little bit. I am super, super loving these Glitz Glitter Gels from Gina K Designs. I've got turquoise and white here. And I'm going to experiment with them a little bit. I'm digging this product. I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to try to push it to the limit a little bit. I've got a piece of turquoise cardstock here cut to an A2 size card. So before I do any stenciling or anything else with the Glitz Glitter Gels, I'm just going to go ahead and adhere this watercolor piece to the card base, and I've just got a healthy amount of tape on the back here, and I'm just going to adhere it because that glitter gel is going to need some time to dry. So I want to make sure everything's on my card. So we've got this really great stencil from Gina K Designs that's part of her new release. And it's just, I love these little dots here. I think they make a great little element. They work really well with the stamp set that she's created that goes with the set as well. But those dots I thought would be really fun to take the turquoise glitter gel and just kind of add a little detail to the jar. But here's what I am loving about this Glitz glitter gel. Okay, we've all used glitter and it gets everywhere, right? And I love that too. I love adding it. But look, this is just suspended in the glue and it's really intense, beautiful, deep, gorgeous, bright shine. And I'm just digging it. So I am going to go ahead and put this down in that lower right-hand corner of the jar and just adding that little bit of glitter. I've got a little spatula here. Now you could use your finger. You could use whatever you're comfortable with. And I kind of just put it on here with the spatula and then mixed it around with my finger because those dots are really close together and I want to make sure it got in the stencil. So once you've done that, you just kind of lift it straight up and you've got this really cool little extra added bit of dimension with that turquoise sea, and I'm digging it. I love it. I love it. Look at that glitz. Look at that glam. Super fun. Now, here's where we're going to do something a little bit unexpected. I really, really love the density of that white glitz glitter gel. It is intense. You are not going to be able to get that much shine from like a gel pen or some other kind of glitter glue. So I wanted to experiment with using it and painting it on. And yeah, I had a little bit of water on my brush and I dipped it in and I'm just kind of painting it in the bottom underneath the jar here and just getting a little bit of that color in. Now you could use your finger, but I really wanted to kind of just follow the lines that I had already painted in to kind of ground this jar and just create this beautiful super shine here. So I've got a little bit on my finger here just to show you that you could paint it in and kind of leave it not spread out, like not smoothly spread out. And I enjoyed painting with it, and I'm going to be doing it a little bit more in some other projects because it really does move well and it creates a super shine on your project, and that glitter's not coming off. It's not like, you know how when you send your friend a card and it's got glitter and it's like a glitter bomb when they open, right? Glitter just comes everywhere. This glitter just stays where you put it, and I love that. So I'm going to go ahead and use the glitter gel again and add a little bit more shine, I think, to the leaves. But I want you to take a look here. Oh, super shiny. I love it. Okay, so I've dipped it in to the tip of my brush, and I am actually just painting it in to that leaf element that's at the top here. And I thought that would really help balance out some of the glitter and the glitz that we've got going on in the bottom here, and just add a little bit, just paint it directly in. Now you could just paint it in a lot of different places, but I thought it would be just kind of cute to add a little bit to the top. And I am loving that. Look at that shine. Just love it. I hope you really enjoyed today's card tutorial. Thanks so much for joining me. Please consider sharing the joy by liking this video and subscribing to this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.